guys.
Yeah, we can see your screen. You're good.
Okay.
Sorry, we just had muted ourselves.
Yeah, no, you're good.
Okay, yeah, you're good.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
good.
Welcome everyone. This is week 6. It is our final week. We made it. This has been a long time coming. I know you guys are, we made our way through the winter workshop. It was a lot of homework. I know it was tough for a lot of people. So I'm proud of you guys for making it through, and we just got to bang out this final session, and we are learned people. So today we're talking about the red grapes of the world. We've been to Europe. We've done Italy. We've done France like every week. We've done some California. We've done a lot of the Northern Hemisphere. And so this week we're going to the Southern Hemisphere. We're going to the other half of the world where things are less established, but things are increasing in quality, every day. And so there is good wine to be had here, especially at a good value. And so we're going to explore some new varietals as well. So the grapes for today are Malbec, Syrah or Shiraz. That's coming from a place in France. So we do have to go back to France very quickly. I apologize. And then we're going to Merlot. And then our other grapes that are being blended in to our Malbec is Merlot, Cab Franc, and Cab, as well as the Syrah, which is interesting because Syrah actually isn't normally blended with these Bordeaux varietals. So as you see in 1 and 3, we have red grapes from Bordeaux. Number 2 is a red grape from the Northern Rhone Valley, where we went during our Spanish grapes week 3. And so these are not normally put together, but in this new world in South America, there is enough innovation that they are blending these grapes together to some success, which we'll see.
Thanks for watching AM Northwest this morning. You don't have to spend a fortune to find a great glass of wine, and you don't have to be a connoisseur to appreciate it. Here to help, we welcome to AM Northwest award-winning wine blogger and the author of Wine Folly, The Essential Guide to Wine, Madeline Puckett. Good to have you with us. I have to tell you, I'm so excited about this segment. So there's so many questions to get to. Let's start with a proper glass is very important for the certain type of wine, right?
Isn't that strange? And in fact, there was a study that came out recently in Japan where they were analyzing different types of glassware to see what happens. And what's interesting and why wine is important, and even things like coffee are important to have in a vessel that can collect the aromas, is because the alcohol volatilizes when you swirl that wine. Yeah. It volatilizes, and all the little aroma compounds get in the air, and they float around and they go into your nose.
So a red wine glass should be big, right?
And well, you should have room in your red wine glass to collect the aromas. People talk to me, well, does it matter if I have a stemmed or stemless glass? That doesn't matter as much as having space in the bowl. So don't go home and fill your glass all the way. Just go like a little bit, and you can always put in a little bit more so that you can swirl that glass in and smell the wine, because so much of our flavor, our sense of flavor in wine, comes from aroma.
But you say stemless or stems, doesn't matter.
I don't think it matters.
Because it's so popular now. I have the stemless because glasses break, and stemless is not so easy to knock those over.
There is an argument that if your hand is on the glass, you're going to warm it up.
Right.
But hold it low. If you don't pour too much, it should be fine. If you're keeping your wine a little chilled, that's probably fine.
Speaking of chilled, all wine should be chilled except for reds, or?
This is a great question, and this is something that even red wine should be slightly cooler than room temperature.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
And a lot of times you can make a really bold, like high alcohol, like 15% ABV wine taste better by having it be slightly chilled. Again, alcohol is evaporating at room temperature, and if you have a lot of alcohol in the wine, it's going to really throw out a lot of aroma compounds which burn your nose. That's why when you smell whiskey, you're like, oh, my nose is burning.
Yeah.
And so when you chill things a little bit, it helps slow down that process. Of course, some white wines are better a little bit warmer. A nice big bold Chardonnay.
Yeah.
If you let it warm up, it just breathes all the aromas that were lost being ice cold.
Gotcha. And what about sparkling wines?
Sparkling wines I like to serve cold because part of the experience of sparkling is the bubbles.
Right.
And everyone,
You have an interesting way to open a bottle of champagne.
Well,
sparkling wine.
I'd love to show this to anyone who wants to drink champagne and sparkling wine and is afraid.
Totally, I'm afraid.
So this is actually, and I can show you it right now, and I'll even make it a little hard for myself.
Wait a minute. Are we gonna have to back off here?
So like if you had a rough drive home or something, and the wine was bouncing in the car or something like that.
Okay, you just shook it up.
There's no reason to have the foil on there if you don't want it.
Okay.
Now this thing on the top is called the cage. If you hold it down with your thumb, it's gonna be secure.
Okay.
And then the little tab here, you twist 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Always. It's a machine that puts it on there. So then you loosen it, but never take it off.
Okay.
Now technically, the wine is dangerous because the cage is loosened. You're standing.
Yeah, well, I'm afraid you're gonna pop that and poke somebody's eye out.
What I like to do is I hold it and keep my thumb on the cage, my hand on the cage, they come out together, and then this side of my hand, I'm going to rotate while holding this. So this stays still, the top part stays still, and I rotate the bottom.
Wow.
And if you hold it at a 45-degree angle, well, about 45, if I just let it out really slowly, it shouldn't spill over.
So I tried to do this.
Thanks for watching AM Northwest.
Because I'm, very confident.
Thanks for watching AM Northwest this morning. You don't have to spend
apparently I can't do it, but it had some success. This was it was our first. We just done the white coat.
Thanks for watching AM Northwest this morning.
I had my mom and sister with me, so this is me trying to emulate it. It ends up being a little bit bigger. So this is my cheese board. It's not as nice Emily's and Andrea's. But
glassware is probably better without.
Yeah, it's embarrassing.
so this is.
My God.
So see, I'm getting there.
That's great.
One day
so you
it'll
can
be
drink. You don't have to be afraid.
Thank you very much.
Drinking.
It's noon somewhere.
Oh, well,
That's great.
I like your style.
Yeah.
The champagne sparkling wine is one of the only drinks that you can enjoy breakfast, lunch, and dinner and midnight snack.
There you go. Now, as you're pouring this, what about decanting wine? I see a lot of decanters out there now. Tell me about your philosophy on that.
Well, in the book that I came out with, I do suggest that pretty much all red wines can be decanted. Now,
Does it taste better if it's decanted?
There are a couple of exceptions to that, but for the most part, yes. And the primary reason why has a lot to do with what's going on with the wine inside of the bottle and how the wine changes when you expose oxygen to it. And for the most part, when we're drinking a nice bold red wine, a Merlot, a Cabernet Sauvignon, a Syrah, something like that, it helps to add a little oxygen so that the components, the phenolics in the wine, can interact with that oxygen and become smoother.
Wow.
So you get a smoother wine.
Yeah.
And if you're in a desperate situation, you have a bottle of $5 wine, you can even do something like this in your blender.
Okay, so as we said, we are going to decant these wines today. We're doing 2 red wines. The first wine we're opening is this Clos de los Siete. It is from 2018 from a winery in Argentina. We're opening it now, and we're going to do a quick decant as we get started. And so just get any vessel to put it into, a pitcher for, parties. You can put it into a mason jar if it's big enough. You can put it into a vase, pretty much anything. And so, I have decanted. Right now, I'm pouring it into a nice glass blender here. And so I'm only one person, so I'm not going to decant the whole bottle, but I'm going to decant, about a serving's worth. And, you can be fancy, try to get a lot of air. It tends to splash, so be as bold or as timid as you'd like. But we have decanted our first wine. And it honestly, so I'm getting some aromas already. And it smells nice. I'm looking forward to it already. And yeah, any questions for this process? We're not putting it in the fridge just yet.
We would like to know which one we're doing, please. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. We're doing the Clos de los Siete. It's the one with a star on it. That says C7. Do you have it? It's the one with a white label. Okay. Let me know if you have any issues. Okay. Cool. So, last week we wanted to see if there was a bridge between the old world, Europe, and the new world. And this week, what we're going to discover is that the bridge can actually be people. We can have people. There's this thing now called airplanes. We can have people fly to and from different regions. They gain expertise in one region and bring it to another. And that's actually going to be the way that knowledge is most easily communicated between different wine areas. And so that's one of the answers to this question. And we're going to see that especially today. And now, but what influence does the winemaker have?
Everything down here is 100% French oak.
The choice to use new oak barrels to add extra dimensions of flavor to the wine is a personal one on the part of the winemaker. And if they decide to do so, the country of origin and even the forest the wood comes from will make a significant difference in the wine. The barrels are toasted inside to caramelize the wood, adding a toasted or even smoky flavor to the wine. American oak tends to add stronger flavors than French, and the differences are dramatic, even with the same wine.
Now, these are both Chardonnay.
Yeah, they're both Chardonnay. They're from the same vineyard, picked the same day. They're both right here from Mendocino.
Go away. This can't be the same wine from the same year. These are totally different.
Yeah, it's quite different, so.
Winemaking is like, it's an art, if you will, and it's an expression. They have an understanding of how oak is going to impact a different varietal. So they use that as kind of part of their palette to select from.
I like the quote from Louis Martini. Louis Martini said, "I want to taste the place where the grapes were grown rather than the container in which they were aged. And if I want oak, I'll chew on a 2x4.
The aging process is entirely dependent on the style of wine being made. But even in the most inert of processes, the winemaker is still at work, refining his product through clarification. As wine ages in the barrel, sediments are produced and the wine becomes cloudy. The sediment consists mainly of dead yeast cells, called lees, along with tannin and grape fragments. The winemaker removes these deposits through a process called clarification.
I got to stop doing that. But the The egg yolk, you see that it's, thousands of years ago, it was known that the egg yolk can actually help precipitate certain compounds and clarify the wine product, just the proteins in the egg yolk. And so that method is still used today. And hopefully I'll be able to find where we were in the video.
Here, a fining agent like egg whites is deposited into the wine barrel to capture the
Not
suspended particles.
egg whites. I apologize.
The heavier solids then fall to the bottom of the barrel, and the clear wine is carefully removed and transferred to a clean vessel in a process called racking. The most efficient method of removing unwanted particles is filtration, and the wine may undergo several stages of refinement. Each time, the wine is pumped through porous materials, trapping solids in the filter membranes. These sediments are discarded, leaving the wine clear and free of deposits. Every wine has its own character, a unique personality based on varietal type, the vineyard location, and the vintage year. But these subtle variations can challenge a winemaker who's expected to deliver consistent wine styles from one year to the next. In a process called blending, the winemaker will combine wines from different vineyards or grape varieties to achieve a consistent complementary blend.
You can have very ripe vintages, very dry vintages, and so by using blendings, you are just adding to the wine what is the most or the better expression of the variety for a vintage.
When the winemaker is satisfied with the final wine, it is bottled, sealed, labeled, and packaged for shipment, often across the globe. When it arrives at the consumer's table, the vast majority of wine is fully developed and ready to be enjoyed. However, the finest wines are often returned to the cellar after bottling and locked away for further aging.
How far back do the wines go in here?
This maturation process allows the wine's flavors to transform and develop further, and with some reds, the harsh tannins to soften.
83 vintages or 71.
71. That was a great year.
Some of the best dry Gavats we ever made.
86. That's the year I was
86.
married.
The greatest wines may be cellared for decades before they reach their peak. It takes an expert to actually predict the lifespan of fine wines, because the aging process will vary widely with each label and vintage year. However, when the moment arrives and the bottle is opened, every wine will be a unique expression of the terroir and the craft of the winemaker.
And so, as it said, when you are buying fine wine, you do have the luxury of, memorializing and making momentous certain dates. So, a child being born, a wedding, these can be, especially if it's a good vintage, which you can look up in our, this club membership comes with a magazine subscription that we're all sharing. And, you'll on it with it, you can find out which are the best vintages. And so if it is a good year, you can, celebrate a big event by buying a lot of wine. And so, for instance, my birthday is in December. And so, this past December, we were able to have, a wine for my birth year. We do it every year. And so just, kind of capturing, when a kid is born and, having, it's only going to work for him for, he or she for, the first 25 to 30 years of life, just because some wines don't age longer than that. But it is a nice way to celebrate a birthday. And you guys will have probably the funds to be able to do so once you become doctors. So keep that in mind. Today, we are talking about the Northern Hemisphere. Then we are going to go to the Southern Hemisphere. As we said, we are going to talk about the New World and the Old World, and we are going to do the things on this agenda. The wines today, as I introduce you to, are this one wine called Clos de los Siete by Michel Rolland, who's very, very famous in the wine world. He has his own Wikipedia page, which comes later in the PowerPoint, just because you're legit when you have your own Wikipedia page. And then we're having this Malbec, different. So unfortunately, they were both supposed to be 2018s, but the store we were getting it from substitute a vintage on me. And so they do that sometimes if they're short on stock. And sometimes you can be picky and say no, it's not okay. I cancel my order because it's a vintage change. I was a little more flexible and said it was okay. So we're not going to, it's because each year is different. It would be ideal to have these two wines from the same place, similar grape, be the same year, but unfortunately it didn't work out for us. But as you can see, the Vivino ratings are pretty good. And so right now we are going to take the wine we just decanted, this wine with the white label and the star, and we're going to put it from our vessel into our fridge. I'm going to start our timer. Because as Madeline Pouquet said in the beginning, red wine really shouldn't be served at room temperature, as I've been saying for the past couple of weeks and pestering you about. So the timer is set and we will begin. And just so you know, background, Vivino, like 4.4 and 4.0, like pretty solid ratings. So just, these are going to be like good ones. Best we've had probably so far. Cool. So the grapes for the week. So a couple of them are new ones, and then a couple of them are repeats. Fortunately, I can't move this screen share icon, but yes, it says a couple of new ones and a couple of repeats. So the new ones are Syrah or Shiraz, as it's called, and Malbec. So these are both wines we have not explored in detail yet. Syrah is coming from the Rhone Valley, as I said, but as opposed to, we focused on the southern Rhone, which is closer to Spain. The northern Rhone is a little more mountainous and a little bit colder. And there, a grape called Syrah does very well. And it is actually not of Spanish origin genetically. It's genetically coming from France. And so we didn't discuss it in week 3, but we're discussing it now because it's going to be in that first wine we have, it's going to be around 20% Syrah. Then the main part of that wine we're having is going to be Malbec. And then the second one is going to be 90% Malbec. And so that's a wine that comes from Bordeaux. It used to be, before the 1950s, it was one of the most extensively grown grapes in Bordeaux, but because of a really terrible winter, the frost was particularly bad that spring in, I think, 1956. Tons and tons of vines died, and they didn't replant them because they were afraid that another cold winter was going to come. And so it's not really in Bordeaux as much anymore. The place in the old world that it is a place called Cahors, which we'll discuss later. But now I just wanted us to realize, so Malbec and Syrah are the new ones. Syrah goes by another name known as Shiraz. That's where it's called in Australia. That's what it's called. And then we have Cab Franc and Merlot, which are also Bordeaux varietals, which we've seen previously, but we're going to have them appear again this week because they're great blending grapes. And I don't want to give away the tasting notes for Malbec just yet, but we have this quote saying, Malbec is my blood, my life, and my family. Presumably, it's someone who grows grapes who says this. It's an Argentinian who's a farmer, and in Argentina, like Malbec is like the grape, which we'll see. So wine 1, as we said, is a Syrah Merlot Cab Sauv. It actually also has a little Petit Verdot. That's a grape that is also a Bordeaux varietal. It's never really going to be more than like 2 or 3%. In this one, I think it's 2%. It adds good color. It's very deeply colored grape, thick skin. But you don't see much varietal labeled Petit Verdot. It's a little unbalanced on its own. And then wine 2 is going to be that 90% Malbec, 10% Cab Franc, however you want to call it. And so just to reiterate, the grape, the varietal, is how we label things in America and how things are labeled in most countries that aren't in the old world, France, Spain, Italy. We label by the grape. You can think of that as the first name, whereas, the region it's coming from, the terroir, the microclimate, is really the last name. And so that is going to influence the wine, but it's not the focus. But we're very individualistic in America. And so we really want to emphasize that first name. But you have to realize that it's coming from a specific region that brings a certain personality to the grape that we need to.
Cabernet Sauvignon or Pinot Noir. Virtually all wine grapes used today stem from Vitis vinifera, called the noble grape. Most wine grapes are grown in 2 belts around the globe, between 30 and 50 degrees latitude, north and south. These regions have the temperate climate and moderate rainfall the grapes need to flourish. The cycle also includes a beneficial winter season, because grapevines need a time to rest between crops. Now, it's not just a matter of geography. Selection of a proper site and the skill of the growers and winemakers will determine the character of the finished wine.
There is an innate factor, which is the terroir, which is the location. You name it, and the place where you grow vines. And then there are acquired factors, which are at least as important. And the work of people who have just developed viticulture in that first identified the place as potentially extremely rewarding and then worked on it in order to produce wine.
Traditionally, grapes were grown in tracts of land that were left over when better soils were used to farm grain and vegetable produce. Today, many of the world's grape growers believe that poor soil produces their best fruit.
You have to find unhospitable, very low in nutrients type of soil. The roots, which will actually drive the roots to go very, very deep. That's where quality starts.
So the roots have really to go down and as down as possible to get the real sap, the minerals. And in fact, they have to fight together.
Obviously, soil conditions will vary widely across the world.
And as we said, or I think we touched on last time, it's, you need to be challenged to bring your best self forwards, and same thing with grapes. And also, historically, we use the best land for feeding ourselves, for growing grains. And we use kind of more peripheral lands for things like wine, which was considered a luxury good, which it arguably is. You have to feed yourself before you can drink yourself to death. Okay, so our regions are going to be France, and we're going to be really talking about people this time because we're talking about the winemaker. And so we're starting in France. This repeat chart, this map, as we've seen before. Syrah in the northern Rhone. So Rhone, think southern France, as you can see on this map near Marseille, a beautiful city. And so on the Mediterranean. But the Rhone, the northern Rhone, is very hilly, mountainous. And so you have very steep slopes that have been, they're very treacherous to farm. And so everything is hand-picked, everything is hand-done. And you have, because it's higher elevation, you have something that we're going to see later in Argentina, that you have thicker skins because, as I said, a different week, it's almost like getting tan. When there's higher UV rays, we, develop more melanin to protect ourselves. The grapes do the same. They develop thicker skins to protect themselves, and that ends up giving us a deeper colored wine. And in Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre, as we see in the bottom right-hand side of the screen, the S stands for Syrah. And so in those blends of Southern Rhone, you do see some Syrah being incorporated to help balance it out. And in America, the best place to grow Syrah, in my opinion, and a good amount of people's opinion, is this AVA called the Central Coast. You can't see it because the screen share thing is in the way, but it's called the Central Coast. It is south of San Francisco and south of Napa and Sonoma. And it's a place where it's a little less prestigious. So it's a little more, tourist friendly for people, who are younger and don't have as much of an income to spend. So a little less bougie, but it's some fantastic wines, some great people, and I highly recommend it. And so you have Paso Robles, you have the Adelaida district, you have a lot of nice places to visit. And so that, America and Europe, we've already talked about. So why are we talking about it this final week? So we're now going to go on the mirror image. We're going to go to the southern half of the world, as you see from this map that we've looked at many times, even though it's kind of blurry. So, you have this 30 to 50th parallel, so 30th north to 50th degrees north is where the wine kind of band is. And you have the same thing in the southern hemisphere. You have the 30th degree south and 50th degree south, creating a band where we can grow wine. And so, as you see from this map, Australia is in that zone. And so this is a place that Syrah is grown. And so, in Australia, you have different regions. It's, pretty nuanced if you want to get into the details of it. But, Australia is worth knowing because they do comprise about 5% of the global wine market. So it is a big presence. Europe is about, 65 to 70%. Australia, especially in America, I would say probably represents more like 10% of the wine supply. And so you go to a wine shop, if you know what Australian wines you like, you'll do pretty well. And so we're going to talk a little bit about Australia, but that's not the focus for this week. So as I said, Shiraz or Syrah is the all-star. They're going to call it Shiraz. It's a little different of a style than Syrah. So when it's labeled, it's the same grape. It goes by two names. It's like Ego and Alter Ego. So when it's called Shiraz, think more like peppery. Think more a bolder expression, more fruit. It's more fruit forward. It's a little less meek. It's a little more arrogant. It's more out there. Whereas Syrah, think Europe, think like, more minerality, more subtlety, and a little more even-handedness.
which in recent decades has grown to over 1 billion liters of wine. What makes Barossa special? Well, how long have we got and where should I start? The Barossa Zone only produces about 10% of Australian wine, but it has always been the country's most iconic and prestigious region, especially for premium quality Shiraz.
Yes. And so what's kind of interesting is, so there was this, I don't know, I mean, we have time because I have no flight to catch anymore. So I'm going to keep you guys extra long to tell you stories you don't care about. But there was this thing, in the 1800s called phylloxera. So basically during the Columbian Exchange, you have like North America being connected to Europe. And you have a lot of diseases coming from Europe, like syphilis and all these things that like devastated the New World and all the Native Americans. And in my mind, like the Native Americans, like, and the people of the New World, they had like a payback in the 1800s. Basically, there was this bug that was, it was on a boat. And so it was brought back to Europe and it was native to the Americas. And it devastated the grapevines there. Like it destroyed like all of European vineyards, like in the 1800s, just like 70, 80% destroyed, dead on the spot. And like, people were freaking out. And what's crazy about Australia is that, so they were established right in the 1700s before this kind of, this plague, reached Europe. And so they were, because they're an island, they were able to isolate themselves. And same thing actually we're gonna see in Argentina. Phylloxera actually never came. And so because the soil is a little different and it's geographically isolated, but you have this revenge and decimating Europe, whereas these old European vines actually still are in their initial forms in Australia and South America, whereas in Europe, they actually had to be grafted on American rootstock because the only thing that could withstand this American plague was an American grapevine. And so what we do now is we take European grapevines and kind of, fuse them with American roots. And so that's how we make grapes now in places with phylloxera, but they actually don't need to do that. So they have the more European grapes being grown, which is a little ironic, but I think in my mind, it's payback for all the terrible things that Europe brought to the New World. So.
Older. Shiraz is Australia's best-known grape and by far the most planted variety in Barossa. More than 50% of the vines planted in the Barossa, so Barossa Valley and Eden Valley are Shiraz. So it is the variety of the Barossa. It's the variety everybody knows.
I think one of the reasons that Shiraz does so well here is that it is just super suited to the red-brown earths, the soils, and also the climatic conditions.
But I suppose it's fair to say that Barossa Shiraz is always going to have lots of beautiful flavour. It's going to be full-bodied. It's always going to be something that people are going to enjoy. Cabernet Sauvignon is the second most planted red grape and yields wines with plush black fruit and ripe tannins. While not as well known by consumers, Grenache makes some of the most exciting red wines in South Australia.
Grenache is something that's becoming incredibly interesting in the Barossa.
Okay, so the video ended. So the wine is ready to take out of the fridge. So please take out your wine. We are just going to finish a couple points before we start. But so the Barossa is the most famous of the regions in Australia. And so if you see something labeled Barossa, it's kind of the next echelon above a generic Australian label, because general Australia, it could be anywhere in Australia. It could be a little bit from Barossa, but it also could be blended with, cheaper grapes from Southeast Australia. And so when it's labeled with a more specific area, it's going to be a little bit higher quality and definitely a higher price. So that was our taste of Australia. I guess I can't pour yet because and also I think it's a little chilly, so we'll let it warm up a little bit. And so we're a little chilly. We're talking about Chile. I wasn't trying to be funny, and it wasn't that funny, so it ended up working out, but there's a little pun there. And so in Chile, we have Syrah, Pinot, Carmenere, and Chardonnay. And I love Chile. It's one of the few wine regions I have been to outside of the US. And so it is, close to my heart. I do think that there's some very underrated wine here, and it is a beautiful place to visit if you fly into Santiago. And we're going to talk a little bit about it because Syrah grows there, but also Pinot and especially Carmenere, which is related to the Bordeaux varietals. It's kind of like a cousin. And so you're going to get similar Cabernet Sauvignon type notes. And then they grow some Chardonnay, which is underrated as well. And so, with when we're talking about these places in South America, it really becomes the difference between latitude and altitude. So that, there's a trade-off as you go, further from the equator, it gets a little colder on average. As you go up in elevation, it gets a little colder on average. And so, this much but what's also interesting is that there's the average changes in the same direction for both. This nuances change differently. And so, as I said about UV light being a little bit slightly different with altitude versus latitude, you have winds being a little different for the difference between latitude and altitude. And so though they're kind of used interchangeably, when winemakers decide what grapes to grow where, it really affects the expression. And so in Chile, Syrah is grown, but Grenache isn't, because Grenache doesn't grow well in the mountains. So the Andes mountain range is right there. And it greatly affects the vineyards of Chile and Argentina. And so Grenache does not do well, whereas Syrah does. Here's a map of the various valleys. I would say the one to know is the Maipo. So on this side of the screen, you can't see my mouse. But the Maipo Valley, so right around Santiago, is the most famous. Valparaiso is also a very beautiful place if you're ever in the area. Like, it's a gorgeous island city with a nice view, and like cute dogs just in the street walking around, like adorable. Probably can get you one of those diseases we learned about, but they're really cute. All right, here's a little video.
Being made throughout Chile, with winemakers producing excellent wines in historic regions and pushing the boundaries into new territory. Yet despite exciting developments and a rich history, Chile remains best known for its extremes: price point-driven consumer labels and expensive icon wines.
Chile is the best country in the world. We can start with that.
A lot of years ago, in Chile, we planted in any place, any grapes. And then with the years, we understand that we need to plant the correct grape in the correct place.
Chile was very industrial-minded in terms of winemaking, and we call it the industry. We don't call it the industry anymore. Chile, it was focusing to the exports, and this means that you need to feed the markets. So the winemakers were making wine to feed certain markets.
Another interruption. Chile is one of the few countries where there was no domestic demand for wine. Every single grape being grown was being exported. And so it was good for the economy. Right now and back, Chile has, the president is a billionaire. America knows a little thing or two about having a president for a billionaire, but the country's policies are very pro-business. And so what we've seen in Chile is kind of this infringement on the locals' rights to land, to resources, to water, and kind of this focus on this export product. And so what was happening, through grapes, is that basically the country's limited amount of water is being exported and it's not being replaced. And so you do have this ongoing issue about global equity in Chile, which we're going to touch on later, but I think I just wanted to establish it now.
Cabernet Sauvignon, Sauvignon Blanc, Merlot, Reserva, Grand Reserva, and this is what you will find till today in the supermarkets all around the world. And this is the perception of Chile: good value, good wines, but nothing really interesting.
Chile has been playing a very safe game, I think, for the last, years, making wines who are value, or as you say, are very fancy. But there we have lacked historically the middle, where it's really the interesting stuff.
California is a helpful comparison for understanding Chile. Both share the common winemaking heritage of the Spanish missionaries and a remarkably similar geography. However, wine growing in Chile stretches over 1,000 miles along Chile's 2,600-mile coast and up to elevations of 7,000 feet.
The history about the Chilean wine started at 500 years ago when the Spaniards arrived in Chile.
During the colony of Spain people in Chile, they came through Spain through Tenerife Island with the Listan Prieto grape. So they established the vineyards in the south of Chile, basically here.
After Chilean independence, the elite looked to European culture as a model. Pre-phylloxera French vines arrived in the 1830s, and many estates were established in the decades that followed, imitating the chateau culture of France.
19th century, a lot of money in the mining industry. France was in fashion. Bordeaux came to Chile. That's when it was the second phase of renewal.
Today, there's a wave of innovation in Chile. Producers are looking beyond the influence of Bordeaux, returning to their historical roots and experimenting with new directions.
First was just making bulk and sell it to the cooperatives. Then was making wines trying to copy a style, like Cabernet Sauvignon blend. And now we make the wine like it is, like it deserves.
It's easy to think of Chile solely from north to south, but it's in fact the complex interaction of the western coastal influence and eastern elevation that defines the country's unique climates.
Chile is very long, so you can split, from north to south. This is very logical because the weather is going to change a lot. But at the same time, you can split the country on three, basically. So coastal, the middle, and the mountain range.
We have natural barriers that is unique in the world. First, you have the desert in the north, then you have the mountains to the east, then the Patagonia with the icy fields in the south, and then in the west, you have the ocean.
There are two major mountain ranges in Chile, the moderate elevation coastal range and the dramatic Andes Mountains.
When you go up to the Andes mountain range, it's completely chaotic because you get everything in terms of geology. So we can be here in schist, volcanic, gneiss, limestone, whatever you want. So, but nobody knows really well because everybody's afraid of frost. The weather is changing, so people is exploring every year, going higher.
We are in the coastal area. We are only 4 kilometers to the ocean, and we have the Humboldt currents that come from the south, and it has a lot of coolness in the water that brings a lot of humidity and coolness into this area.
Access to water varies between growing regions. Some areas could face an existential threat as climate change creates variation in the glacial run.
So yeah, this is where I was going to introduce that idea of kind of the sustainability of vineyards is really important. And you can ruin the people who are harvesting the grapes, and in the long run, that's not really great for either the domestic wine industry. That's not great for like the international consumer. It's not great for anyone. And so there's kind of this balance that needs to be navigated more prudently. And we're going to see that as we kind of think forward past this course. And so I just want us to think about it a little bit right now. Cool. And so, yeah, I highly recommend, this is me and my soapbox, but I recommend the Netflix like documentary Rotten. It's basically the same story, but for the avocado, but basically water rights being infringed upon, and it being good for, a country's GDP, but not so much for the people who comprise the GDP. Okay, so on a less somber note, we have different regions in Chile, and they kind of talked about it in the video.
Production here is quite experimental, and most grape growers remain focused on Pisco.
Pisco is an...
So to go back, we talked about, Emily asked a question earlier about spirits, and we haven't talked about spirits, but there are wines, grape-based spirits. So you have mezcal in the Mediterranean region, and in Peru and Chile, they make something called pisco.
Production here is quite experimental.
Awesome, and I'm going to.
Production here is quite experimental.
Yeah.
And it's a DOC.
The culture of Pisco is shared with Peru, as is the popularity of the Pisco Sour, a shaken cocktail made with lemon juice, egg white, and simple syrup. South of the Atacama.
So it tastes nothing like grapes just because they add all that stuff to it. But basically you take like really hot areas, like basically like Southern California where they grow grapes, just not wine grapes. And then you make hard alcohol with it, and then you can make a lot of fun things, and it's fun.
Production here.
But let's not watch.
You need to in the future to think.
Yeah. Let's not watch those videos because it's time to drink. I've had this wine sitting next to me and I've been ready. Cool. So we are opening the bottle. We already decanted it. Now we are pouring it. So the hard part has already been done. We've already done the work. And actually, yeah, we've done the work. And I'm gonna stop share for a second just to see if there are any like questions as we like get started. I don't know how people doing. Sweet. Yeah, no. All right, sweet. What's up, guys?
I have just one quick question.
Hit me.
If these are both Malbecs and the bottles are like different shapes, is that significant for these different blends?
So great question. So honestly, I would say like you have a good eye because like these to me, these both look like tall and skinny. Like you're right though. The angles are slightly different, and it's more the aesthetic. These are both, I would say, Bordeaux style bottles, but there is slight nuance. Like this one is kind of slanted outwards, and you could say that that's kind of the Syrah influence. So it's less of a straight Bordeaux. This is like classic Bordeaux. Whereas this, with the angle, tells you actually it's a bit more modern of style. It is kind of this weird blend because it's so innovative. They put it in like a cool bottle, but good question. Sweet. All right, yeah, we're starting.
Still.
Yeah. Cool. People see my screen again? Yeah. Okay. So this guy who makes this wine, he has his own Wikipedia page, as I said. Pretty cool. You got to be pretty big in the wine world to have your own page. And he's like, it's a pretty filled page. It's not just like a sentence like he was born this day. Like it's pretty cool page. So I'm just gonna look at it, and I suggest we begin to interact with the wine as we watch these videos, just 'cause, like, what else are we gonna do but drink wine in wine club? So yeah, just like have a little fun. We're gonna watch this little clip, but like,
Traditional producer is focusing on harmonizing all of those elements. Modern style producers reduce the time in wood and generally use new oak, including new French oak, to impart a vanilla toast and spice to the wine. These wines will be more youthful in appearance, meaning more red-purple tones more than orange, and the fruit will be more pronounced.
And so this wine is very much a modern style. As Emily said, with the wine shape of the bottle, it is a very modern wine as opposed to a traditional wine. Both of these are modern because we're in the new world. We have these flying winemakers, they're called. So this guy, he's a French dude. He's flying to South America during the French winter, which is South American summer, in order to like bring his knowledge, while his vines in France are dormant, they're sleeping in the winter. He's going to the place that vines are awake in order to like bring his knowledge there. And then like when the season changes again, he's going to fly back in order to affect that. So like, it's a pretty modern idea, the flying winemaker. And so they're going to be very forward looking in their style. So it's going to be more fruit pronounced. It's going to be a little more youthful. It's going to be a little bit more of what that international consumer wants. So pour the wine. This question of why do we blend, we answered this week 2, I believe, with this clip. But I just want a reminder. So this is, this blend is 50% Malbec. And then, as I said, 15% Syrah, like 20% Merlot. You have these other grapes and like, why blend it all? Like, what's the deal? Do you not have enough of one grape to make a wine? Why are you mixing them? Is that a good idea?
Merlot, for example, brings fruitiness, the floral side, the violet, the rose petal. So both seems to be logically a good complement, a good balance. And Cabernet Franc brings more or less between both. It is spicy, but at the same time, it brings acidity, so it is fresh and brings aging capacity too.
The winemaker can actually adjust the quantities of these different grapes in different years. So if one year the Merlot doesn't ripen as well as the Cabernet Sauvignon, he'll put more Cabernet Sauvignon in. So it's really a winemaker's wine.
What I want is vintage after vintage to bring to the consumer the best expression.
So yeah, I think that idea of bringing the best blend, it's not so much about like what did well that year. If Merlot did really badly, like they can get around that by just using the other grapes. It's more so my more romanticized view. It's to have that perfect recipe. The Coca-Cola secret recipe, like it changes every year based on what grapes are a little sweeter, what day they harvested, but it's to bring the best expression forwards. And that is done in South America by blending these grape varieties that we don't, in our minds, think like, oh, those should go really well together. That's like peanut butter and jelly. When I see Syrah and Cab, I'm not thinking like they should go hand in hand, but this guy thought they could. And so we're going to see how that turned out. So let's analyze this wine a little bit. As you see, it's a red wine. It's very dark in color. I'm looking at it. I'm looking at my hand. I can't see my hand under it like at all. The rim is very purple ruby. It's probably one of the deepest colored wines we've had so far, which makes sense given that it is 52% Malbec, which is known to have a very dark color, but it's still noteworthy nonetheless how deep a color this is. It's also a very intense color. So, it's that purple ruby, I would say high intensity and a deep color, and it is clear. There's no imperfections. So they did, the egg white process correctly, where they did fine it. And so there's no things suspended, making it mucky colored. Now we get to smell it. Okay, so we're gonna do the chest, chin, nose test as we've done all year now. Nothing. I'm getting something. I am getting something, but I'm gonna stick the nose in anyway. I'm getting a nice bouquet out of this. And so I would say so fruit is the easiest thing to do. So definitely blackberries. I'm getting juicy blackberries. I'm getting boysenberries. Honestly, you could even say, because we're in Buffalo and like people know what it tastes like, I'm almost getting loganberry. Like it's not a little bit, because there is some red fruit in this, I would say, but it is black fruit dominant for sure. So like boysenberry, think mulberry. That's like because we use unheard of fruits. Mulberry, speaking of Ukraine and Russia, it's like this berry that grows in Ukraine and Russia. It's basically like a blackberry, but it comes from a tree as opposed to like a bush. And it's a little softer in flavor, but I'm getting plush notes of that in this nose for sure. In terms of other aromatics, I would say I'm almost getting like a Christmas spice box. You could call it allspice, you can call it cloves. But I think we might see a little more on the palate, but I am getting notes of that. In terms of, it's always nice to be able to call out a floral or an herbal note. But Malbec is known to be so fruit dominant and so ostentatious, in what a stupid word to use, but like very out there, so that it really covers up those more subtle nuanced notes. And that's a lot of people in Europe, what they say against wines like this. They're like, oh, I hate American wine, or I hate South American wine, because it's so fruit forward. It tastes like, juice. It tastes like, sun-drenched fruit. Whereas, a European wine, because it's a little colder in Europe, isn't so fruit dominant. But I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. The global market obviously doesn't either, because Malbec is very highly thought of by international consumers. So this is, and also on the Vivino score, like this is a crowd pleaser. If you had a lot of people over and you were serving a steak, like you probably should serve this, and you'd make the most people happy. Now we can finally taste it. So in terms of analyte sweetness, it's fruity. So some people might think we're getting sweetness, but if we covered our noses, I think we would see that it's dry. There's no residual sugar in here. It's a table wine, a dry table wine. Acidity, I would put this on the medium I would say medium, maybe medium high, but I would definitely, it's not, it doesn't stand, the acidity to me is perfectly in balance with the wine, and it doesn't stand out. Same way with tannins. There's no tannic backbone. Week one, we had that Italian wine, which was a Merlot. It was a Super Tuscan. So Merlot and Sangiovese and Cab, but like that one was so tannic. This one, none of that. Even though that this also has similar grapes, Bordeaux varietals, I am not getting like this. You could serve today, and people are not going to be like, it's drying my tongue out. Like it's not. I literally didn't even eat food yet with this, and my tongue is not dried out at all. I could drink this all day.
Wait, Sep.
Yes.
We have a question.
Hit me.
So when you say that this is a table wine,
yeah,
is that like a negative comment, or like a lower class thing, or that's like a good thing?
So no, all right. So great question. So like you're right that could be used as saying this is not a very fine wine. It's table wine. We serve it with our food in this country. It's about a $10 bottle, 10 euros. It's a table wine. We serve it, free. If they get a meal at my restaurant, I serve them the house or table wine, and that just comes free of charge. And that has more a negative connotation. Here, what I'm saying is it's a table wine in that. Honestly, I may have used maybe that's not the perfect term to use, because I guess I was more going for it. It's a dinner wine. It's not a wine you have when you're not eating. It's not a wine you have, when you're on the porch. It's not a wine you have with dessert. It's a wine you have on the table. You have it with lunch, with dinner. Not really with breakfast so much, because it'd be hard to pair with breakfast foods, just because it's so rare.
That's
so
the
like,
reason.
Yeah, I mean, you got the idea. It's yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Sweet. Good question. Yeah, so body wise, so even though I said first alcohol, Alcohol in this, I'm not getting much on my palate. It's smooth. I would say medium. If anything, I mean, I don't want to cheat. I'm so tempted to look at it, but yeah, it's not noticeable, and that's kind of the beauty of good wine. I mean, I know like last week when I had that Chardonnay, and I was like, and I kind of like shit on it. Like good wine, you're not supposed to notice like things so much. It's supposed to just be like an all-encompassing, like well-rounded piece of art, really. It sounds a little funny, but it really is supposed to be kind of, it's supposed to stand for itself. It's supposed to speak for itself. It's supposed to be well-rounded. And so you're not supposed to notice these things. Like we're parsing them apart because we want to analyze them and learn from them. But if I were drinking this at a dinner table and nothing came to mind immediately, it means that I have a good bottle, and I'm not going to tell the waiter or waitress to take it back because I don't notice anything, out of this ordinary. It seems perfectly in tune. So the alcohol is perfect with this amount. The body, so that's, heavy cream versus skim milk. With this one, I'm getting a medium high body, I would say, which maybe the body's a little high for the alcohol content, some would say. It's a little plush and fruit, bold in fruit for the, a little more subtle alcohol content. But I think that it's partly maybe because of the temperature we served at, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Okay, so now this is the first time I have cheese to have with it. And so, that sip, I had a little bit more tannin. I think it's funny. I think when you spit it, it goes through like your tongue twice. And so you get more of those tannic notes. So that's how I did taste more tannin. But with the cheese, it's the classic combo, a tannic wine with a hard, strongly flavored, so this is an extra sharp cheddar I'm having with it. It's a classic combo. You could also go with an Asiago cheese. But, you have that tannin to, hit the fat, hit the protein in there. And just the way it interacts on the tongue and the palate is very refreshing. You can go back and forth all day. And one kind of like counters another. It's like going from like a sweet snack to a salty snack to a sweet snack to a salty snack. It's like, if they're the right examples in their category, it's easy to go from one to the other, as opposed to just like eating candy all day. It's like you get bored of it. It doesn't refresh the palate. And so in flavors now in the palate, I am getting more of that that Christmas spice. You can call it spice box. You can call it gingerbread. I wouldn't call it gingerbread really. But yeah, so you're getting those spice notes. And then in terms of like herbal stuff, I would say maybe tobacco leaf. Besides tobacco leaf, I don't have that cheat sheet in front of me, but like tobacco leaf's the main one I'm getting. I'm gonna be curious to see what it says when we get to the the answer, so to speak, what other people have seen in it. But that's the main herbal note I am getting currently. And then so the finish. So the last thing on this list, it says finish. Now I'm sharing my screen properly. The finish is the aftertaste, right? So it's how long it stays in the mouth. This wine, I had a little cheese. I went back and forth. I would say that this finish is probably about 5 to 8 seconds, at least. I think that it is a pretty substantial finish. And so that is indicative of a higher quality. And so as we see on this graph, it's not supposed to leave, you swallow it. It's not supposed to stay like in your mouth forever, the taste. But like you don't want it to like disappear the second you swallow it. You want kind of those residual compounds to be coating your mouth for more than a couple of seconds. And so one indication, at least traditionally, of good wine is a good long finish. And so it's often used as a proxy, being like, someone, you serve them a nice wine and they're like, they want to show you how much they appreciate you, shelling out cash for that wine. They're like, the finish on this is like, they're like 30 seconds or like a minute. They'll like, go crazy. And like, it's a compliment because it's saying that it's a very good quality wine. So if you're trying to compliment someone, say like the wine's finish is really good. There are probably better compliments to give, but that could be one. Okay. What does it say? It says deep red, purple glints. Sure. Fruit and spice, got that. Delicate tannins or ripe and silky. So when describing tannins, you can call them rough, you can call them coarse, or you can call them silky. So Malbec is known to have soft tannins. And so instead of saying soft, or you can kind of describe the texture as silky, because it is. It's not rough. It's not coarse on the tongue. It is kind of soft like silk. Well balanced in structure. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Charming and elegant. Yes. Next one. Assertive and confident, displaying blueberries, blackberries, wet earth, and chocolate. So wet earth. Okay. Ripe and round. Yeah, I should have used the word juicy, because it definitely is. With all those berries, it does give off a definite, I said like plush or something, but like juicy is probably a better word to use. And so blueberries, it's funny, Malbec is really the only wine that, it's usually when you see the word blueberries in a tasting note, it's usually referring to Malbec, just because it is such a berry dominant wine. And so we're getting, so lavender. Honestly, I'm upset I missed it. If James Suckling is right, if there is lavender notes, I mean, I could see that, but I didn't call it out, so I didn't get it. Crushed stones and cocoa. Cocoa I could see as well. And so instead of silky tannins, he calls them powdery tannins. Now the last one, Wine Spectator says roasted cherry, plum tart, dried savory herbs, from acidity tannins. You got the note. Dusty graphite notes. If you've ever eaten dusty pencil shavings, pencil shaving is actually another word we use to describe wine. Old red Bordeaux style wines. Most of us have not eaten pencil shavings, but it's this idea of dusty graphite notes. It's kind of like the smell of back when you used a non-mechanical pencil, like standing near the sharpener, kind of like that whiff is basically what we sometimes get in wines. And then so a Vivino, call out to Natalie recommending Vivino. This is honestly probably one of the better Vivino notes I've seen. So apparently the winemaker went to Argentina in 1988, fell in love with it, cheap land, good people. He made this, he established this business. And so blackberries, blueberries, smoked oak, pepper spice, adding tobacco and leather. Oh yeah, I agree with this guy. Light cocoa and lively acidity, fine tannin, so silky. The other word they use, powdery. We also could use, I already lost it. Whatever word he used, I don't know, I lost it. But yeah, you can use different words to describe the tannins. Fine tannin, all right, he said fine tannin. So like fine, as in like not coarse, but fine. And it got 71 upvotes, so it's the real deal. So now we've had a lot of myths and facts in this rhyme in quotes. And so one kind of change of our rhyme is when in doubt, break your wallet out, and putting that statement like on the stand, so to speak, in court. I would say that kind of, sure. Like if you have someone coming over who like is into wine, if you spend more money, you're more likely to impress them, maybe. And that's in general. It could be anything. You could be, serving steak, and like if you spend more money on the steak, you're probably more likely to have people like it, right? And so when in doubt, break your wallet out, sure. But I think you have some knowledge that you can kind of get around not having as thick a wallet, just because knowing what pairs best with what, and knowing kind of those general rules, I think allows you to each thing to show its best expression and its best self. And so you're able to get away with not spending as much, and kind of going by using the ratings of the Vivino, by using kind of these kind of secret clues, you can kind of get a better bang for your buck, and you can get a higher value. And so going to the initial slide, one of the things that this wine, the wine we're having second, said, it said that, it tastes like a wine twice the price. And so like, I see a rating like that, or I see Vivino, so thousands and thousands of ratings, it compiles it on an algorithm, and it outputs that it is, for a wine that's rated this highly, it should be twice the price. I say like, I'm getting that. And so then you're more likely to impress people just because it outperforms its price range. And so yes, if you have a big wallet, it helps to spend a lot, but like you can get away with not spending as much. So I would say fiction, not fact. Okay, now that I've preached for so long, I am going to put this, we're going to decant the second wine now. So we're going to open that up. Maybe I'll play a little clip. So intermission, we're watching a video about South Africa, also in the Southern Hemisphere, as we open this bottle. So South Africa is part of Africa, as you know. And because of it's part of Africa and like humans came out of Africa, right? Like 200 something million years ago. It kind of is like the oldest world, really. But in terms of wine, it's a little bit of a border, or like it's a bit of a argument about which one it is. So we're gonna watch a little clip. No, we're not gonna watch a clip. I'm gonna tell you about it actually. And so basically there's one wine to know in South Africa, and that's Pinotage. So you take Pinot Noir, which is from Burgundy, which we explored in week 4, I want to say. Week 4, we went to Burgundy. And week 5, we also went to Burgundy for the Chardonnay. So last week. But Pinot Noir is a cool climate grape. And then you take something like Hermitage, which they thought was Syrah, which we're exploring today. We just tasted something that was 15% Syrah. And then they crossed them and they made it a little more heat tolerant. So South Africa is kind of hot. If you've ever been to Cape Town, you know, it's a pretty warm place. And so Pinot Noir wouldn't grow well there unless you're talking about like very off into the water where it's like very misty. And you do have like this place, Walker Bay, which does grow good Pinot Noir, like straight up Pinot Noir. But like the grape that they are famous for is this grape called Pinotage. So they took Hermitage, which is Syrah, or they thought it was Syrah. It really was Cinsault, not Syrah, but it's a different story. And they cross it and they kind of combine the names. So Pinot from Pinot, Hermitage, so Age, so Pinotage, and the name stuck. So as I said, it's near Cape Town. So flying to Cape Town, you're right there. I did a wine tour. It was honestly, I think it was only a 1-day wine tour. They drove us around, around the Cape. Stellenbosch, great place to visit. It was only like $100 and like unlimited wine. Unfortunately, I found out while I was there that like I just like don't like Pinotage. And so like that is like every winery you go to, they're like, oh, try our Pinotage. And so like I ended up just being like, yeah, do you have anything but Pinotage? But it's just not, it's a great grape. You got to try it. It's very chocolatey and spicy. So you have some interesting notes coming out. It's not for everyone, but it is a well-established grape, and it is South Africa's go-to grape. That, and in terms of the white wines, they have something called Steen. It's really Chenin Blanc. They just call it Steen for some reason. And so Chenin Blanc is also pretty good there, as well as like, Chardonnay does well in Walker Bay. So Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, because they're cool climate grapes from Burgundy with the G, not Bordeaux with a B-O-R-D. So Bordeaux and Burgundy are different, hopefully at this point. So 1 week we did Burgundy, 1 week we did Bordeaux, different places. Both start with a B. And like my mom, like she's been, like my family's been talking about wine for like 30 years. Like my mom still doesn't know the difference between Burgundy and Bordeaux because like they're easy to confuse. So like Burgundy, Pinot Noir, and Chardonnay, cool climate. Northern France. Bordeaux, Western France on the Atlantic. It's growing that these grapes that we're having today, like Cabernet and Sauvignon Blanc, that is the distinction. Let's keep it like, there's a lot of other nuances. Like we had an hour and a half long session on each, but just basically Burgundy and Bordeaux, different places, both very respected in the wine world, both kind of like the paragon of their style, but different, kind of confusing, easy to, on conversation, kind of never remember which one's which. And so like my poor mother, I forgive her. Like she, it's just hard to keep, honestly, it's hard to keep track. Like sometimes, like for everyone, like in the beginning, they just sound so similar, like buh, 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 buh. They sound similar. But yes, they're different places. Now the intermission with a video so I can open the wine. We're talking about Greece, which is also kind of this interesting, is it old world? Is it new world? Greece, if you didn't know, has been making wine for a long time. Wine, grape growing started in Armenia and Georgia, thousands of years ago. But it kind of came classic Greece, ancient Greece. It kind of became a part of the culture. And so, you have all this artwork with people, drinking wine. You have the symposia. You have people congregating over, meals, serving wine and talking, philosophizing. And that was very wine related. And so you have this old culture of wine, but technically, because it's only gotten good in recent years, some people would classify it as the New World. And so we're going to watch a little clip as we open this one.
Greece is one of the most ancient wine-producing countries. 2,500 years before the Common Era, inhabitants of Crete likely learned to make wine from the nearby Egyptians. As the Greeks were seafaring people, they later helped spread the cultivated wine to other parts of Europe.
Το κρασί για την Ελλάδα είναι ένα πολιτιστικό αγαθό που ξεκινάει σχεδόν από την ύπαρξη της ελληνικής φυλής σε αυτόν τον τόπο, περίπου από το 4.500 χρόνια π.Χ.
Wine played a central role in early Greek culture, evidenced by Dionysus, god of wine and fertility, whose worship inspired wine-fueled symposiums and led to the development of Western theater and philosophical tradition.
Homer describes wine and wine drinking mainly as a double-faced product, because if you drink moderately, it brings joy and pleasure. If you overdo it, then it's a curse.
Greeks were not the first to produce wine. There are other people that have been doing that for millennia. We don't know how far we go, but what we know is that we were the first to develop a culture about wine. The first sommeliers in the world were in ancient Greece. The first wine writers were in ancient Greece.
After its ancient success, the development of Greek wine struggled from the Ottoman period until the modern era. But after Greece joined the EU in 1981, quality began to rise appreciably.
In the last, let's say, 20, 30 years, Greece has discovered the winemakers. That means we have many, many, many new students that studied abroad. They came back, they gave a new birth to winemaking for Greece.
Little winemakers, little wineries were flourishing, and now we have a number of wineries and winemakers who are putting their creativity in the development of the Greek wine, exploring the Greek varietals, also the Greek terroirs, the different places.
Varieties Malagousia.
Αγιοργήτικο.
Ραδιανό.
Προδίτης. Μούχταρο.
Ξινόμαυρο, ρεφόσκο and Aglianico.
We have a lot of varieties in Greece. We cultivate around 100 varieties for commercial wines, but there are also around 300 varieties cultivated in Greece. The characteristic is that they are very well adapted, productive and vigor varieties. You have to control them in order to produce high quality wines.
While many grape varieties sound exotic, some, such as Assyrtiko, Moscofilero, and Ayoritico, are gaining.
So Greece, they're like the opposite of Argentina in that northern hemisphere versus southern hemisphere, sure, but both are new world regions, so to speak. But Greece, because it also has this long history, you have all these local grape varieties. So it's like Portugal, right? You have all these hard to pronounce grape varieties that the international buyer doesn't really know how to read the label for. Like most people have never had Assyrtiko or or Xenomavro or Moscofilero. I have, just because my family went to Greece, and like these are very table friendly wines. So as Andrea was saying, with a meal, with lunch, with dinner, and they just, it's part of the culture. With every meal they have wine. It's not so much about the wine, it's about the food and the people, but the wine is there and it enhances both the food and the people. Funny enough, but it's hard to know what the grapes are. And so when I'm going to a wine store in Buffalo, like I'm not going to see much Greek wine because like it's hard for them to sell because no one knows what the hell they're getting. So it's just kind of an opposite in terms of where it stands in the global wine perspective as opposed to Argentina. Here's a quote about wine, because we haven't had a quote about wine in a while. Okay, so the wine, so we put the second wine in the fridge. I'm sorry if I didn't say that. Yeah, and so I'm setting a timer for 11 minutes. I am going to keep going. I think we are doing a little slow on time, but I hope that's not a problem. If it is, feel free to leave, watch the recording. But now, yeah, the main act, we're talking about Argentina. That's why we came here. Our first wine was from Argentina, even though we didn't talk about it that much. Just because I wanted to talk about the other places that are also part of the world, just because I wanted it to be kind of an all-encompassing class and just like an intro into everywhere. And so we kind of had a taste of everywhere. Even if we didn't taste everywhere, we got a feel for what the wines would be like from there. And so now let's talk about Argentina. So it's close to Chile, but it's on the other side of the Andes Mountains. And so this effect that elevation has and this rain shadow, so it's similar to California, where you have on the other side of a mountain range, you have a desert. And so that comes into play as well. But the wineries aren't in the desert, complete desert, but it is kind of a chaparral, a Mediterranean ecosystem, as California is, as most great wine regions are, except for New York, which, you know, is able to do it without that climate, which is pretty cool, if you ask me. But yes, Argentina, unlike Chile, actually has a local wine market. People there actually drink wine with their food. Argentinian food, similar to Brazilian food, they're very known for very salted barbecued meats. If you go to these places, like the meat, like fantastic places to visit, first of all, but like also just the food there is great, especially if you're a carnivore or an omnivore, and the food is great. And so the wines pair really well with the foods. And there are a lot of people there. Buenos Aires is like 20 million people, big place. It's also pretty iconic. This idea of like the cowboy, it's in Brazil too. It's in Argentina. So, kind of a livestock heritage, the tango, like they're very serious about the tango. They're honestly a very proud people, a little standoffish sometimes, the Argentinians, but in terms of other South American countries, like they consider themselves the most European. They're the palest, and like there's like some complex there. But they are, very proud people, but they're very iconic people. They have great wine, and it's a very interesting culture. So you fly into Buenos Aires, biggest city there. They say a very European city. I'm very proud of saying that. Then you take a 2-hour flight to Mendoza. I actually missed my flight and I had to take a bus. Pretty brutal, but you could also take a 30-hour bus, but I recommend a 2-hour flight, probably a lot better. And so basically you have like the whole country's wine production is in this small region, essentially, of Mendoza. Just like 90% of American wine is coming from California. You have like a high percentage of Argentinian wine coming from Mendoza. And specifically, you have it coming from this grape called Malbec, which this lady in a little toupee will tell you about.
Cooking in Argentina is part of our culture. It's the same.
Not a toupee, but whatever it's called. I don't know what it's called.
Cooking in Argentina is part of our culture. It's the same as in countries like Spain or Italy because of the big European immigration that came to Argentina. I think that people who make wine, who drink it, make better wine. So that's one thing about Argentina.
Argentina is best known for Malbec and for its more inexpensive wines. Yet the country's winemaking tradition and its geography lend themselves to varied and high-quality production.
We have the Andes Mountains, which is in Mendoza, the tallest mountains in all the Americas. And these mountains created a special climate and special type of soils where we grow the grapes.
Argentina's winemaking history begins with the arrival of the Spanish in the 16th century.
We have vineyards and viticulture since the Spanish people arrived here, practically 500 years. They came with the vineyards.
These first missionaries and settlers began cultivating grapes in the foothills of the Andes. In 1816, Argentina declared independence, and the following decade saw an influx of Spanish and Italian immigrants who would help develop the wine industry.
You see people bottling their wines in Argentina in the early 1800s when there was no bottling factories in the Americas. For 3 centuries, wine was a huge thing for the economy of these provinces.
Production continued to grow, with nearly all of Argentina's wine consumed within the country.
We arrived in the middle of 70s with more than 93 liters per capita in consumption, which is huge.
But as bulk production rose, quality dropped. In the 1970s and early 80s, political instability and a military dictatorship further challenged the growing industry.
When you talk about Argentina, the normal version goes, oh, well, Argentina had immigration, it focused on making a lot of wine. In the 90s, with consumption crisis, it started focusing on quality. And it is true, Argentina started focusing on quality, I would say in the 80s rather than the 90s, but it is true.
In the 1990s, so-called flying winemakers from France and the US began visiting Argentina.
When people like my father and other producers started exporting wines, they were thinking of high-quality wines. In order to make these high-quality wines, we needed some consultants because Argentina really was completely out of touch with the winemaking of the rest of the world.
Michel Rolland is a very famous winemaker, loved the place, commented to Robert Parker, and Parker had...
Well, I think that was just the correct pronunciation of the guy whose wine we just had. Let's just listen to it again.
Is a very famous winemaker, loved the place, commented to...
Was completely out of touch with the winemaking of the rest of the world.
I'm starting to wish it wasn't like 20 times speed or whatever the fuck it is.
Michel Rolland is a very famous winemaker,
Michel
loved the place,
Rolland.
commented to
I think that was the same dude.
Had the predictions, said the Malbec will be one variety very famous in all over the world.
With the rise of quality and international attention, exports grew. The devaluation of the currency around the turn of the century made Argentina's wines even more attractive to an international audience. Today, Argentina's importance in the global wine market continues to grow. The Andes mountain range is the defining geographical feature of Argentina's wine regions.
The Andes is the key or the explanation of the style or the expression of our wines. First, because the Andes mountain isolates us from the Pacific, so we live in a desert.
Very good producers. Zucardi, very famous family of winemakers in Argentina, probably represents about 1% of of all Argentinian wine, especially of the higher quality stuff. So very noteworthy for like one producer to make like 1 or 2% of an entire country's wine. So keep your eye for that label. It's a good brand.
Wines. First, because the Andes mountain isolates us from the Pacific, so we live in a desert in high altitude.
We grow the vineyards in high elevation, between 2,500 and 5,000 feet of elevation. That gives us an extra sunlight intensity over the vineyards and produce concentrated grapes with a lot of polyphenols, tannins, color, intensity, and aromatics.
The second thing that the mountain gives to us is the water. Because we live in a desert, the only way to cultivate is using the water that comes from the snow.
It creates this continental climate because it acts as a barrier between Chile, who's on the Pacific side, and Argentina on the other side, of course. So it creates this dry climate.
Hail is a major threat unique to this side of the Andes. The Zonda wind, which comes down from the mountains, further intensifies desert-like conditions and makes irrigation a necessary practice.
The characteristic of the Zonda is that it's a very dry, hot, and sometimes very strong wind. When we have in general this wind, it's snowing in the Andes mountain because you have a compression when the air is coming down.
Runoff from the Andes mountains has created a series of alluvial fans, providing ideal soil conditions for the cultivation of grapes.
The origin of the soil is mostly alluvial soil. It means that the water transported the material from the Andes to the different valleys where we grow the grapes.
Argentine wines can be labeled by Indicaciones Geográficas, most of which were created based on political boundaries. Today, new IGs are being defined by differences in soil and climate. The heart of Argentina's wine industry is the broad Cuyo region, which includes the provinces of Mendoza, La Rioja, and San Juan.
Mendoza is in the center of the country. We produce the 70% of the grapes of the country. Then you have San Juan that produce the other 20% of the grapes of the country.
Mendoza's importance to Argentina's wine industry was further solidified when a railroad line to the capital city of Buenos Aires was completed in 1885. Mendoza can be divided into 3 regions: Maipú, Luján de Cuyo, and the Uco Valley, all of which are dominated by Malbec. Furthest east, Maipú is flatter and hotter than the other regions, and historically known for Bonarda and other higher yield production.
So Luján de Cuyo, which is a slightly lower altitude, it's around 3,000 feet elevation, also has predominantly clay soils. These soils are a little more friendly to the vines, and those wines have a mid-palate and a texture that's very different from.
So this is another flying winemaker, Paul Hobbs. I actually met him. He's a pretty cool dude. Went to Notre Dame. And so he at the wine club there, like had an event with him. But yeah, he's a flying winemaker, very famous in America. In Napa Valley, his label is like, it sells for like $200 a bottle on average. Yeah, it's pretty. Yeah, he's like an Italian American guy. He's like America's version of the French guy we tasted earlier.
Uco Valley.
Luján de Cuyo is well known in Mendoza as a land of Malbec. The characteristic of the Malbec from this region is the complexity, the elegance, the finesse, and the red fruit.
While Luján de Cuyo is Mendoza's historic center, just southwest, the Uco Valley has captured attention for its quality wines grown from high elevation vineyards.
It's a valley that is in front of a very big mountain, but the mountain is not one, but you have like 2 chains. One that is the frontal cordillera and the second, the principal cordillera.
It's almost like 2 different regions, because if you go towards the west, towards the Bungato, you have the higher altitudes, you have the sunlight effect on the thickening of the skins. If you go further south, you have more shallow soils, less stones, because we're less near the mountains, so the soils are different. You have less of the sunlight influence.
You get nice acidity, fresh acidity, a higher tannin concentration, a violet profiles.
North of Cuyo, the Calchaquí Valley traverses the northern provinces of Catamarca, Tucumán, and Salta, with vines planted at the world's highest elevations for grape growing.
So yeah, I hope it's not starting to drag. I know it's a longer session, but Argentina makes good wine. There's 1 minute left on the timer. Malbec is the main one. They also have another grape called Bonarda. It's the red grape, I would say, of the people. It's traditional. So, in Italy, we said that the best sites in northern Italy was going to Barolo, and the less good sites were going to a grape I'm blanking on. It's going to bother me, but so be it. It's the same thing here. They use the best sites for the Malbec, and they traditionally use the less good sites for the Bonarda, but they're changing that now. And so you're going to have better quality Bonarda being made. It's a very interesting grape. It's, a little lighter, and it's worth checking out if you like Malbec and want to, drink Argentinian wine for some reason. So yes, Malbec, iconic, dense color, as we saw, medium to full body, blackberry, cherry, plums, boysenberry, maybe even a little loganberry, notes of chocolate. Originally, it's from Southwest France, and they still make it there. But the one from Southwest France is going to be much more tannic in character. Tastes completely different than the Argentinian one. It's like night and day. It's really totally different. And same thing with the like a Bordeaux version. Bordeaux doesn't make any like especially labeled something called Malbec. But as I said earlier, you know, in 1956 there was a very cold spring, and a bunch of vines died, and they never replanted them. So yeah, it's time to take the wine out. But that is the story of Malbec. Okay. So as we said, you know, it's a high elevation in the Andes. And so we have, you know, thicker skins being made from the UV lights, which causes more tannins and a little more bitterness. Okay. We're just gonna let the wine, you know, heat up in the glass a little bit. It seems to be about, you know, low 50s temperature wise, which is not a terrible thing. But you know, it could be a couple degrees warmer. So when it's okay, it's time. And so as we open this, you know, as our wine heats up slightly, we're going to watch a little clip about the second wine.
Hitting the sun. If you're at the foot of the Andes, you lose some hours.
Grown in every wine region from north to south, Malbec is Argentina's best-known grape.
Malbec is our flag, it's our identity. It's the variety that represents Argentina in the rest of the world. It's a variety that is very important for us because we use our Malbec to make the iconic and the best wines from Argentina.
Malbec is a French grape brought to Argentina by agronomist Michel Peugeot in the mid-1800s.
When you take a look into Malbec in Argentina, everybody knows Malbec, but the Malbec in Argentina has nothing to do with most Malbec in France.
It was brought from Europe before phylloxera. So we have a population of Malbec, very antique, that produce a...
So again, phylloxera. In the 1800s, a plague devastated European grapevines. It didn't affect South American vines and Australian vines.
Low yield with small grapes.
Malbec accounts for 21% of grapes planted in Argentina. The second most planted grape is the red variety Bonarda at 9%, known elsewhere as Charbono.
One of the biggest grape varieties in Argentina, which is Bonarda, we've always thought it was Italian and it's really French.
Bonarda really has a very good adaptation to our weather, so grows a lot near to Malbec. But in general, has been very focused on the lower altitude areas. The challenge for us today is cultivating high altitude situations.
It has a lot of natural acidity. It's very fruit forward. It's very light. It makes me think of a Dolcetto or even a Nebbiolo. It has this sort of Italianish character.
Among the earliest grapes to arrive in Argentina was Criolla Chica, known in Chile as País, and in Spain's Canary Islands as Listán Prieto.
Listán Prieto, which is actually Criolla Chica, what we have here. Everything started in Argentina with our Criolla varieties.
Red varieties such as Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc are finding success in Mendoza, while Patagonia is developing a reputation for its Pinot Noir.
People think of Malbec, Bonarda, but actually Cabernet Sauvignon and Cab Franc came to Argentina at the middle of the 19th century at the same time as Malbec.
Awesome. So Torrentes is the white wine of Argentina. It's very light, it's very floral, it's very aromatic, kind of like Riesling, or so yeah, I would say it's more acidic. No, not less, more acidic. Nothing's more acidic than Riesling. It's more like spritzy, if that sounds right. So it's almost like effervescent. It's usually a screw cap, and so with a screw cap you can have trapping of gas, and so just the style of Torrentes, it's a little effervescent. Great wine though. Okay, so we poured our second wine. It's heating up slightly in the glass, and we are going to look at it. Again, similar color as last time. You have a very deep ruby going all the way to the rim. It's clear, intense color. And yeah, I would say again with that purple rim, noticeably deep. Now let's give it a whiff. Now, this one's a little more muted than the last one. I don't know if it's because it's a little colder or it's a little more shy. But I'm getting, you know, those characteristic Malbec notes. So I'm getting honestly, I would say it's annoying. I'm getting black raspberry. It is a fruit. It's like a blackberry, but it's almost like a synthesis of red fruit and black fruit because you know it only turns black as it ripens. But yeah, so I'm getting black raspberry. I'm getting some of that cherry stuff, which you know they said in the video or one of the videos, which makes sense because we should be getting it right. So I'm getting some I would say like Bing cherry, like a red cherry, but not like an overly sweet red cherry, like almost not sour, but like on the border between sour and sweet. In terms of herbal, I'm getting generic plant leaf. So I've been, a lot of the sessions previously, I was not always swallowing the wine. This time, his cat just like hit me, scared me. Cool, yeah. So I'm fine, but yeah. So I have been swallowing, so I'm maybe a little foggier. I'm not able to distinguish between subtle leaf cues, I think. But I mean, I would put it. I mean, I would leave it at a foliage. I said tobacco leaf last time. I don't want to say it again, but because I can't think of anything else, I would say tobacco leaf again. Maybe I wouldn't say tomato leaf, but I would say probably tobacco. In terms of spice, I'm not getting any spice yet. It could be the blunting of the palate from having the alcohol earlier, but we'll see when I taste it what we get. So let's give it a taste. I like it. So, definitely we served a little cooler than the last one, but I think it is quite nice. Now, Malbec is a very refreshing grape. And so with this cooler temperature, I think it really brings out the refreshing nature of it. I think this wine could stand up to a beef entree, it also doesn't need a beef entree. I mean, I would definitely put it with a barbecue of some kind, maybe like a pork chop. But yeah, it also is kind of light. And so for this one, I would say it is a higher acidity than the last one. It might just be the cooler temperature, but I'm getting a higher acidity on the palate. I'm getting similar level of tannins or lack thereof. For the deepness in color, psychologically, we expect a little bit more tannin. For me, Malbec always comes up a little short because you're expecting this deep, almost like a Petite Sirah, which we didn't try. It's an American grape, a lot in California, but it's really dark color, but also very tannic. This wine, not so much. There's also a grape in Uruguay called Tannat, which is similar to Tannan. So it's a very high tannin. And it's similar color, but also very high tannin. So this one, for the color, not that high tannin. Alcohol, it could be the cooler temperature, but I'm getting, medium to medium low, or yeah, I would say medium alcohol. Body wise, I would actually put this a little bit lighter than the last wine. Again, it could be the temperature complicating our taste or my taste, but I am getting a bit of a lighter body on this. Yes. And it's funny. And so Nick is showering and I think I'm smelling his body wash a little bit. So I think that's also kind of skewing things. Okay, let's watch a little video about the Tango.
Argentina's food and wine cultures have evolved together, and the two marry well, particularly when it comes to meat.
It is a true fact when people say that the local food goes with the local fruit. Patagonian lamb, which is probably the best in the world, sincerely. And that goes incredibly well with the Malbec.
Argentina is famous for beef, so I think our wines match very good with meat. It's part also of our culture. In Argentina, when you meet your friends or your family, always is with a grill, fire, and a beef. So I think we have a very good match with meat.
The traditional preparation is asado, in which beef, sausage, and vegetables are grilled on an open-flamed parrilla.
The asado is part of Argentine culture, just like Christmas and New Year's is for other cultures. It happens every Sunday to every family.
The empanada is another staple of Argentine cuisine. The recipe for this stuffed pastry varies from region to region, with empanada fillings ranging from beef or chicken to fish, spinach, sweet corn, and dessert variations.
I think wine is a generation activity. Every generation needs to put one brick over the generation before.
El futuro de la Argentina creo que está en poder mostrar al mundo que somos un país con varias regiones vitivinícolas, con distintos terruños muy diferentes entre sí, distintos estilos de vinos, distintos estilos de elaborar el vino. Creo que es muy importante conservar la tradición sin dejar de incorporar la innovación tecnológica o la innovación en cuanto a elaboración, pero también el sistema tradicional tiene una autenticidad que es muy difícil de encontrar en otras regiones vitivinícolas. Por eso creo que hay que conservar las dos cosas.
So yes, it paired very lovely with roast meat over fire. So carne asado, that type of thing. And so let's see what the people say. Per Vivino, so this Malbec, Enemigo Malbec, the name of the brand. Enemigo means enemy in Spanish. And so it's just the brand. As Vivino, on average, it took, 5,166 reviews of people that don't know anything, but you take an average of people who know nothing, and like it ends up being pretty accurate if you take a large enough sample size. And so what the masses are saying, which is the intelligence of the masses, it says that we're getting a lot of oak and vanilla notes. So oak notes, so that's the chocolate, which I actually totally missed. I don't know if I said, I don't remember. And then so we're also getting the blackberry, so the black fruit notes, the plum, the leather and smoke, then the cherry, the raspberry, and so I would say probably a less predominant note for the pepper and cinnamon and licorice as last time, but there are spice notes. So what other people are saying and the wineries, so this is not on the Vivino. Again, cherry, dark berry, Malbec, yeah. So floral stuff would go great with a double cut pork chop. And so again, so Wine Spectator is saying raspberry. So when I said black raspberry, not too far off. Yes. Okay. Red currant. So, as you know, Klebsiella gives currant color to sputum. Red currant is not always in a gross connotation. It's a fruit, which is often used in the context of wine. So don't always be grossed out when you hear Klebsiella. Finish. So the finish on this one, I think the chilling affects it, and I also, it's the odor in the room from the soaps. So I'm having a little trouble, but I would say the finish, put it around 10 seconds. And so, some overall stuff, the wine industry, we focused on Europe because 70% of the world's wine is made in Europe. But there are new wineries every day being created. And so there's always more to learn. And so though you've taken a whole course in wine, there's always more. And so you can always, in this topics covered, the exclamation and question mark were for the ones we did this week. So Australia, Argentina, South Africa, we touched on Chile, we touched on, Russia, it doesn't export much. And, soon, they're probably not going to be exporting much to the US time soon. It's mainly domestic and it's not that good. I've had it, not good. Israel also, it's kosher wine. So, for if it's a Jewish holiday, I sometimes have it, but it's not very good. It's okay. And yeah, so we've had the real ones, the good ones though. And so we've tasted a little bit of each and we've gotten this appreciation for it, but there is always more to learn. And so we've touched on sustainability and, in the last 5 minutes of the class, we're going to listen again to a video just because, it's easy to make wine in the style that like all, products, vegetables are produced, which is, fertilizers and a lot of inputs and kind of erosion happens and all these things happen to the land, but it's not great in the long run. Even the wine doesn't taste as good. And so when you have the option of buying, more sustainable wine, it's on the label often. It's often labeled green wine. I know wine.com has like a whole category called green wine, which is pretty ambiguous, but stuff. So wine, it's not labeled organic, but made with organic grapes, right? We said organically made wine has no sulfites, and like that means it's not going to age well. It's often produced as like a marketing thing. It's just often bad. So don't buy organic wine, but like buy like wine made with organic grapes. Like that's okay. That's a better probably product. But let's listen to this little spiel.
Sustainable business practices. And by sustainable business in the wine business, referring to making decisions that are environmentally sound, economically viable, and socially just.
One of the great things about California is that we truly lead the world in sustainability. The idea that we will leave the land to the next generation in at least a good estate, if not better, than where we found it ourselves.
The green shift in California has been gaining ground over the past 10 years and is dedicated to improving the land through non-chemical practices in the vineyard. While protecting workers, it also creates healthier, better tasting fruit.
Sustainable practices are a very important part of how we grow grapes and make wine in California. And that's what sustainability is always going to be about, is continually improving your practices for today, for tomorrow, and for generations to come.
So with high volume wines, like in Argentina and Chile have been focused on historically, which is, cheap wine we get at the grocery store for $2 because we're trying to drink on Thursday night. Those wines are bad for the environment. Because those wines require a lot of water. Those vines, because they try to make as much grapes as possible with one plant. And so there's a lot of input being given. With a higher quality wine, luckily enough, it doesn't require us to water it. It requires it to struggle, which happens naturally in places that are on the extreme. And so, wine growers don't like doing it because it means that some years they're not going to get any grapes, right? Some years are going to be too harsh for anything to happen. And those, some places, only water in very extreme circumstance and like that, and using kind of like soaker hoses, so things that don't evaporate all the water in more sustainably minded things. And so high quality wine requires the vines to suffer, which means there is an ability that we do have the option of having more sustainable wine by just having kind of higher quality wine. Which, is kind of a cop-out for someone like me who likes high quality wine. But it is true that more sustainable wines are generally going to be priced a little higher in the market, as opposed to like the $2 Chuck or the Franzia, which is not as environmentally friendly.
When you see the young generation going back to work in the vineyard, it means that you have more and more people who are aware of the quality and want to really show they can make great wines.
No, the challenge is to make the next generations understand how precious and important is what they have in their hands, how fragile it is also, and how essential it is to find ways to keep it the way it is.
Vigneron Christophe Caudier.
So yes, there is still hope. And on that note, I think we are calling it. Congratulations on finishing it. Please enjoy, this bottle. These were by far I think the two best wines we've had so far. So one of the Pinots is really good, but these were definitely two of the higher quality ones. And so if you think like a different week when we had cheaper wines, if you think that week you enjoyed more, like you should take that knowledge and run with it. That means you like those varietals. You can get away with not spending as much on wine right now. And so like, take that knowledge and run with it. All of us are going to have different preferences. And like, so on average, this one pleases more people. So what, get the wine that you like. Just know that there are objective criteria we use. We use the color, we use the finish. We're trying to geek out, but like, if you like cheap wine, like keep drinking cheap wine. It's like, honestly, you'll save money. As I said, the first week. And so, yeah, congrats, you made it through. We're gonna give a little diplomas and superlatives, maybe. And then, submit like pictures. And yeah, so this was the, Capstone Wine Club. We're gonna take a pause now, probably for March. We're gonna let people, do their thing. And then we're probably gonna restart up after spring break, hopefully have an event in person, just because like the workshop is over. Everyone's kind of like pretty knowledgeable, at least a little bit, about wine. And so I'm not embarrassed to like go to a wine bar with you, just because like, a decent amount, definitely more than the average person. And so, please like submit your photos of yourselves. And like in the syllabus, there's an option to like write tasting notes every week. And like, if you did that, don't feel pressured that if you didn't do it, like, don't worry about it. But like, you can submit that. And like there's the option of like, having a fancy bottle with like a small group of us and like, submit it. And that could happen. But then again, just like submit your photos. I want to thank you guys for like staying with the session this long. I'm going to stop sharing now. And I just want to say, I appreciate everyone spending their week.
Thanks so much. Yay!
Thank you guys. It's always a lot better when like people came. So like, thank you guys for coming. And
is there going to be like another one?
Yeah, are you gonna do it again?
No, because I feel like now we know enough to like go to like establishments and like enjoy ourselves.
Oh my god.
What if it's like, yeah, what if it's like a different, it's like a wine club, but it's not like this, it's like in a different setting that we're like applying our knowledge that we supposedly know at this point.
No, I feel like, I mean, that's the goal, right? I feel like we do know stuff, like, yeah.
Right, yeah, that's what we're saying. Yeah, we know a lot.
I mean, so there are wine bars in Buffalo. There's this one like across the street from the school, but the problem is every time I go there, they're like closed. I don't know if they're like closed for good, but there's one on Main Street, and there are like a couple others that like we could frequent, and like that's the goal of the club, right? We're not just like a one season class, like we're like a club, you know?
Yeah.
I'm recording.
So if anyone has any ideas whatsoever, it could be like something's totally stupid, like please give the idea, like the group chat. Oh, Emma's got one right now.
Yeah, we were thinking like with all this newfound knowledge that we have, I mean, the, Emily Gretchen group already knows this, but we would be down to throw like a dinner wine pairing event where people like potluck style, where you bring a bottle of wine and like food that pairs with it. And then we can like have food and like have wine and hang out.
I think that's a great idea. I love that idea. And then, no, I totally love that idea. So wait, the question is though, do we want to do that in March or wait till after April? Honestly, like we could do that in March. Like, what do you guys think?
We hadn't thought that far in advance. We were only releasing the ideas behind